Do you want, okay, so we'll just start. I can't hear you, Alyssa.
Oh, are you able to hear me now?
Now we can hear you, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Let's see, there's 7 people on. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started. I don't want to wait too long. So hi everybody, thank you all so much for coming today. We're really excited to have you. And so this is today's session with Diego Santelices. Sorry about that, I'm so sorry. Diego is a community worker who's been called to teach those around us about how to better our community. And we're very excited and happy to have you here today so we can learn better about your story and your knowledge. I'm really thankful that you're here, and I'll now turn it over to you so we can hear your side of the story.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to first start sharing my screen so we can get this presentation started. So one of the things I am going to ask folks is, let me just make sure to put this so it's not. Yeah, okay. One of the things I did want to make sure I said is that there are going to be some portions for questions, but towards the end of the presentation, that's when I was expecting to do some questions. So there's some question time in this presentation. Also, I do want to preface this that what I'm trying to teach you guys is really basic level stuff. I don't want you to think that what I'm telling you is the only bit of knowledge. There's so much information out there, but I want to be able to give you the quick tools that you need in order to form a union in your workplace. And when we go in, we'll talk further then. So the first thing we see is this great quote by A. Philip Randolph, who was a great labor leader. And the thing he says is the essence of trade unionism is social uplift. The labor movement has been the haven for the dispossessed, the despised, the neglected, the downtrodden, and the poor, which is just absolutely part of the reason why I do the work that I do. I'm very lucky to be able to do something that, even though it can be very draining emotionally sometimes of some of the things that you have to deal with, I love my job and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Next slide. Okay, so the first things first, what's a union? One of the things I'm going to ask is if anybody would like to venture a guess of what a union is, and then see from there. So if Alyssa or anybody can tell, if there's anybody in the chats, just, you can say it out loud or you can unmute yourself and say it. Sure. Okay. So, oh, seems like we have a chat. Okay. Tanya said a group of workers coming together to fight for better conditions. Yes, that's definitely one of it. And I do like the fact that you said a group of workers. So one of the things that you will notice about how I talk about unions and how I talk about forming a union is not a union comes and is formed. It's a union is the workers in the workplace, right? So if you work in a hospital, all the workers in there that decide to come together to form a union are the union. The fact that they are under SEIU, Teamsters, blah, 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 that is irrelevant. Ultimately, a union is, when workers come together to fight for what she just said, working conditions, benefits, all that good stuff. And sometimes not even for money. A lot of times unions are started because of things as basic as respect. Very not too long ago when I first got here, about in 2017, there was a strike in Sonoma County courts where the workers actually went on strike not for money. They actually didn't get any pay raises at contract, but they went out to strike for respect. Because they were being treated so poorly by their management, they actually decided to go on strike in the middle of a rainstorm for 3 days and to make sure that the management knew that they were coming together to fight and were not going to be trifled with anymore. And this was the culmination of a year-long campaign of terror by the management team on the side of the courts. I mean, they did every dirty trick in the book to mess with these people. Excuse me. So that's really what a union is. It's really just a collection of workers within a workplace. And they come for the common goal of better working conditions and pay. Okay, so a good question is, why doesn't everyone have a union? Just to venture to guess, does anybody have any idea about how many people are covered under a union contract here in the United States? You could just shout it out if you don't want to put it on the chat.
10%.
Okay, one person said 10%. Anyone else?
I'm going to say it's less than that. I'm going to say it's like 5 to 7%.
Okay, 5 to 7%. One more. Okay, so we're going to just, it is actually like 6%. So Tanya, you were right on the money. And most of that is actually in the private sector, which is an insane thing to me. If you compare it to other industrialized countries that are up in the 20s, high 30s, 40%. And these are not just, these are like countries, and I hate to use the word first world, so we're just going to use the industrialized or developed countries. So the unionism and trade unionism as a specific course is not something that's kind of like unreal or unheard of. So the fact that it's super low in this country is from a variety of factors. One factor is the fact that most of our unions in this country were very much based in the industries that have actually been either decimated by offshoring or decimated by automation. So things like the automobile factories that were key to the UAW being one of the strongest labor unions in the country, when those jobs started being shipped out of the country or being sent to non-labor friendly states in the South, you saw a real diminishing of union density in key industries, right? Another thing is, as probably most of us know, it's not very easy. We're going to go into this later into the presentation. It's not easy to form a union. When you form a union, there's a lot of things that go on. And that's done on purpose, right? Because when you form a union, there's a lot of things that happen after the fact. So everyone knows that union workers make more money. Everyone knows that union workers have better benefits, better retirement, things of this nature. And so our labor laws are very much in line to kind of prevent that from happening. And we're going to talk about some other things that are in there too later on, but that is something that we really need to understand, that there's also, not only is it hard to form a union, there's also there are the whole cottage industry, not cottage, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry to keep workers from forming their own union, which is a shame. And it's a sad state of affairs where, if you think about it, where companies spend way more in these anti-union consultants than they would ever pay for any contract that any union would ever get. And I mean, some of these anti-union consultants get paid hundreds of dollars per hour to try to scare people into not unionizing. And I'm going to go into some of the more scarier ones later on, but it's really bad. We have something in the chat. Alyssa, can you check that out for me, please? Sorry. So that's something that why everyone doesn't have one. Also, there's a clear propaganda campaign against unions that have been going on pretty much since the strength of unions during the great boom after World War II. You know, many times have you seen out and out anti-union politicians pretty much make their political stripes by taking on public sector unions. For example, for not too long ago, we had Governor Scott Walker make Wisconsin a right to work state, which basically makes that non-members don't have to pay anything towards their union. And one of the sad things about that is that Wisconsin was actually the first state to allow public sector unions to exist, or public sector workers their right to organize. And that's so sad to see within a couple generations that Wisconsin being the beacon for this kind of stuff to going on the other side with having Governor Walker pretty much strip not only their bargaining power, they also have to do certification elections every year. They can only bargain about certain things. I mean, they really made it almost impossible for unions to do their job in organizing workers, but also helping increase the floor of their membership. And so that was done very deliberately. Also, the Supreme Court decision, Janus versus AFSCME, made the entire public sector in the United States right to work, which basically allows for non-members to be covered and protected by a contract without having to pay a representational fee or a service fee. And that was something that was the political actors that really, like the Freedom Foundation and all these other people, were really keen on that Supreme Court decision coming down on their favor to make sure that they could try to eliminate public sector unions in this country. Unfortunately for them, it actually helped increase the numbers for our folks now. I mean, I work for a public sector union specifically, and we've actually saw after Janus a lot of those folks becoming members and the growth of membership, because the attack was so brazen that it was no longer a question about being on the sidelines. And a lot of people decided to become members because of the Janus decision, because they did not want to deal with that or not pay for anything, even if they had disagreements with the union's political philosophy or whatever the case may be. So that's one thing. So I'm going to just move this. Sorry, guys. There. Perfect. So the union difference, is there one? So the short answer is yes. And why you're here, yes. The long answer is also yes. There is a union distance, a union difference. And so there was two quick factoids that I really wanted to show is right here on the screen that, like we talked about before, unionized workers or unions covered by a contract make on average 11% more than non-unionized workers in the same industry and occupation. In the public sector in California, it's a little bit more like 15 to 20%. With everything else being equal, unionized workers make more money. For Black and Hispanic workers, they even get a larger bump because of that. The wage gap is not there because everything is covered by the contract, the wage scales and everything like that. It's open. Black and Hispanic workers get a larger boost from unionization. Black workers represented by a union are paid 13.7% more than their non-unionized workers, where Hispanic workers are represented by unions are paid 20% more than their non-unionized workers. That's huge. 20% is a massive increase in people's buying power. And that doesn't even account for the dues, which is already placed into that whole thing. And many times when people think of unions, they all automatically think of strikes and dues. That is the first thing that people think about, and that's where they get skittish. They're like, I have to pay and I might have to go on strike. And they'll force me to go on strike. And so you're seeing that even with all of that, they're still making more money. And this is a huge thing for workers right now. As we know right now, wages have been stagnant in the same level as from the 1970s. They have not gone up with the rate of productivity. And if it did, it's one of those things where it would be closer to $25 an hour. Our minimum wage is $7.25 nationally, where in California, at least it's 15. But these things don't, this matters. And this is why what I do is critical in trying to make sure that other people can have, a taste of whatever this so-called American dream is, right? Which is like the house, the car, the white picket fence, the 2.4 kids or whatever, things like this, right? That was all possible thanks to unions. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, if I'm not in a union, how does that help me? The strength of the labor market, or the strength of your labor unions, correlates directly to how much money you make. So if you're a non-union nurse, the fact that unionized nurses make so much more money makes you kind of more competitive, because they don't want you to unionize. So they want the wages to be somewhat similar, so the incentive for you to not unionize is there. But like we talked about before, there are many reasons why people want to unionize. And we're going to get into some of that, because that can help in your campaign. Because hopefully after this conversation is done, you will decide to, I want to do this, and I want to form a union with my coworkers, and this is what I want to do. That is what my goal is in this presentation, is to want to make sure that you have the tools you need to at least start the process. I can also, after this, when you get my email, I can send you this, the Economic Policy Institute study about this, especially during COVID. This was one of the most fascinating things. Another thing that we've noticed that unionization has helped with industries that had strong union presences did not have the same issues with COVID as their non-union counterparts. I am very lucky and very happy to say that all my chapters, anecdotally, we have not had a single COVID outbreak or an exposure event. And that is something that, thanks to us having a dynamic union with our members being all up in there and really making sure that they're safe, we were able to make sure that COVID was not an issue for our workplaces. And that is something that I'm very proud of, and all of my colleagues that are in unions that do this work have been able to accomplish that. Excuse me. Okay, story time. So this is one of my favorite parts of this, where I get to tell you some really cool stories about what happens when folks like yourself call me or call my colleagues to become unionized. So when I was a baby organizer back in New Jersey, I used to organize primarily nursing homes and hospitals, but primarily nursing homes. When there was one nursing home in particular in this town called Toms River, it's a very red town, very conservative. There was a nursing home that had really some significant issues. Respect, where they were treating their workers like shit. Excuse my language, sorry. They were treating their workers very poorly. They were paying their workers abysmally, nowhere near industry average or industry standards. Their healthcare, there were people that working full time that would actually lose an entire check just in healthcare cost. So imagine that you basically work for 2 weeks just to pay for healthcare costs and taxes. Insanity, okay? They decided to form their union, and they called us. We started doing all the things that we needed to do to be able to file for an election. The first thing they did when we filed an election, the employer, was to give them all a 3% raise. First thing. And we took credit for that, as we should, because that was their first union victory without actually having a fully fledged union. They were able to get, because they came together to file for an election, they ended up getting a 3% pay raise. This is one of those moments where you will notice how the dynamics of, what happens when a boss recognizes that they have a unionization effort in their midst. They will try to quell it first with pizza parties and nonsense, mandatory fun activities. Then they'll just throw the hard. If that's not working, then they'll throw the cash. But the problem with that is that goes away. And so this particular, once they, so that that happened. So we're good with that. After, when we were going through the election process, they pulled tons of dirty tricks. They didn't call an anti-union consulting firm, but their management team really did a number on some of these workers. I mean, mess with their schedules. They try to terrorize people. They did what they would call captive audience meetings, where they would take them off the floors when patients were needing care to talk about how terrible the union was and how the union was garbage. It doesn't care about anything but your money. And they, this one they also did was like an anti-union joke of the day, because they were really they thought that these like really bad jokes about union workers was going to really get them to like not want to be union in like the weirdest way possible. They were really bad jokes, clearly. And it just didn't work. And so we ended up winning that election pretty handedly. I think it was like to a 4-to-1 ratio, and we won it. And the first thing they tried to do after they won was try to take back the 3% raise that they had given them as a bribe to keep them from unionizing, saying that now that there's a union, they can't do that. And so obviously the first thing we did was say, hey, we're never going to say no to, pay raises that people are going to get. So, keep on giving them that pay raise. So that takes out their sale. Another one, which was not a victory, but I would be remiss to not say about what a real bad employer can do, is there was another nursing home that was part of a massive chain called Care One. Care One was the quintessential bad boss. The day we filed, they had 10 anti-union people at the facility 24 hours a day. They were sleeping in the facility to talk to people about how bad the union was. Some of them even went to some of my leaders' house to scare them out of being part of the union or part of the unionization effort. Okay, so, and in many of these cases, I don't want to speak for all nursing homes, but in New Jersey, many of the lower paid classifications like CNAs and the custodial staff or the kitchen staff were primarily women of color and immigrant women of color. So having a strange man come to your house in the middle of the night is a scary thing for anybody. But just imagine what the traumatic event that can cause. This went on for months until we finally lost almost all of our support, and we had to pull the campaign, and we lost that election, right? They were so happy that they won that election, the Care One, that we pulled out. They made a big to-do about it, and then they fired everybody. And they whatchamacallit, they staffed that nursing home, which was one of their biggest nursing homes, with temporary staff until they can hire full-timers. And so that was clearly retaliatory, and we had to take them to court for it. And I believe that they're still fighting that court battle. And so I tell you this because when your employer is awful, they can do some awful things, and it's sort of legal with our nonsense labor laws that we have. There is good stories, because we got a lot of their jobs back also. So I don't want you to be like, wow, dude, that's way to go. Like, my boss can be that way. I don't want you to be too scared about that, but it is something that we need to, also talk about, because I can't sit here and tell you it's all rainbows and unicorns and your boss is going to be super happy that you're trying to unionize. More than likely, they're not going to be very happy. And so there's that. Another great story is there was a nursing home down in Atlantic City that we won the election, and they had a great boss, a boss that was super nice, an amazing guy, would go and shake hands with everybody when they came into their, and then the day that we filed for an election, they fired him because he was too nice. And they put a horrible boss in there. And one thing you're going to notice, one thing that I say often, the best union organizer is a bad boss. And when you have a bad boss, they tend to get members or workers to come together and just to fight against this one boss. And I am a big believer in organizing people around the issues that they can be organized around, because not everybody is down with unions. Not everybody is okay with the idea of unions, but they all know, everyone knows what a bad boss looks like, and no one wants to work for a bad boss. That's a pretty universal, unless you're the bad boss, I guess, then you kind of want to be, no one wants to. So that's something that you can make a campaign about, and how, a lot of times, you'll see these bosses kind of try these games where we're a family, we're all this. And that's not the case. That's the case now because there's a unionization effort. And so you're going to talk about the power dynamics that are happening in real time during this. So we're going to go to the next slide. Okay. So this is the fun part, where to start. The first thing is you need to define your industry. What does that mean? It means, am I a public sector worker? Am I a private sector worker? The reason why I say that is that as a private sector worker or a public sector worker, there are different rules that govern how do you unionize, or even you can unionize. There are some workers that are not allowed to organize right now because of really bad laws. The union that I work for, SJW 2021, was really keen on organizing the Uber drivers and the gig economy workers. And one of the reasons why Uber and Lyft pushed and paid for their own labor law through Prop 22 was because of our unionization efforts. So right there, those workers are no longer allowed to work to try to form their own union. We're working to try to work around that to see if there's a way to do that, but that's something that they're not allowed to organize right now, which is sinful, in my opinion. Everyone should be allowed to organize. The next thing, ask yourself, do you think you and your coworkers are ready? Or you're clearly ready because you want to do it, but do you think your coworkers are ready? And what does that mean? Everyone likes to sometimes project their thinking onto others, right? I know I'm guilty of this. I remember for many times I thought that anybody that worked for a union had to have the same politics that I do, right? So clearly everyone's a super progressive Uber, pro worker, and not have no conservative, or don't have any like anti-union views, right? And that's not the case. That there are people that have very different views, because people are people, right? And not everybody has the same experiences as you. Not everyone has the same ideas or ideology as you. And that's okay, because ultimately in a union, you have to get people to think about things that are bigger than themselves. And I've come to the realization that everyone likes more money or better benefits. Unfortunately, that's just the society that we live in. I feel like there's more to life than money, but in the framework that we have right now, that's what we have. And I've worked with people that are very conservative, and I say a small c conservative, that not necessarily are in the same place as I do, and that I am, either because of religious reasons, or they're one issue things, like their issue is guns, right? And my personal feelings on guns aside, you can have that discussion. But I think that once you have the respect of your coworker, because you're showing them that you are actually worried about something else than just, these like culture war things that are just nonsense, people can really just work with you on that level. The third thing is issues in the workplace that can help drive a unionization campaign. Not every union campaign is based on the same thing. A lot of times there's a lot of overlap. There's a very big Venn diagram about many of the things that are the same, but it could be that you're getting paid really well. It's not about money. It's really about your boss being mean or a bad boss, or it's unsafe. Like, like the workers over in that Purdue chicken plant where the managers were having bets on who's going to die from COVID. That's a real thing, and that's disgusting. If you want to know more about it, that John Oliver had a really good special about that, but there's also great articles about that I would love to share with you. But things like that, we need to be very real. Like, not everything is about money. And sometimes it's really about respect, safety, these issues that are not necessarily what I like to say tangible, right? You can't touch respect. You can't see, I guess you can see respect if someone's like, mocking you in front of them, but but like in these they're not the same thing as a 10% pay raise. They're just not, because, different people have different ways of seeing respect and everything like that. Get a list of employees that you feel would be in your group. The reason why I say this is that your employer is going to say, oh no, this person, Mary Jo, is a manager. Joseph Soprano is actually not in this unit. He actually does this. Diego is not here. He's not eligible. So you really want to make sure that you have a clear, concise list of who should be in the bargaining unit. And that is something that is a huge part, unless you're doing a wall-to-wall organizing where everybody that isn't a manager is automatically a part of the union. That is something that I think is clear, and it also helps a lot of it helps from a lot of headaches going forward to do the legwork now. And also it's going to help you with your mapping, which we'll talk about later. Thank you. Also, pick the union that you feel would be a good for you and your workplace. Now, what I say with that is we can all name a couple of unions off the top of our head: Teamsters, SEIU, CWA, ESC, blah, blah, blah. What you really want to do is make sure that you pick a union that is actually good in your industry, that has things that know about your industry. You do not want to call HERE the hotel workers union or restaurant union if you work in a hospital. Not to say that the good folks at HERE are bad or they're not good unions. It's just that that's not their wheelhouse. They don't know that industry. You would rather go with someone that actually has a hospital division or whatever, like UHW, that, or even 10-1 that has public sector hospitals. So this is something that you have to be very real, that you need to know and this would all be good because you have already defined your industry and what you do. What you do because you're the best person for that. So that's why I'm always going to tell you to be sure you pick the right union for you. There are things that are amalgamated unions. I believe the Teamsters are one of the premier amalgamated unions, which means that they're not a very niche union where they only deal with certain things. So that, they do tend to have different industries, but it's always good to go with the union that actually is the industry leader in your industry, whatever that industry is. Okay, steps of unionization. Now, this is a long list, and I do appreciate that it's a long list, but I do want to make sure that we go through it. Making contacts. So that's more for the organizer that you're going to be working with, but also unless you work for a company that's like 10 people, you're not going to know everybody that works for you, especially if you work in an area that has different shifts. Unless you're working in a swing shift where you kind of meet everybody, it's very hard to know everybody in your workplace unless A, it's a very small workplace, or B, you're a busybody like me and know everybody because that's how you just engage with the world. So this also helps the organizer that you're working with to be more effective out in the field, either through phone calls or through house visits. Building a committee. Now, this is something that I think is very critical. When we did campaigns back in 1199, this was something that we kind of never did, which is unfortunate. At least we never did when I was there. They're doing that now, and they used to do it back in the day. But a committee is what you would call your organizing committee. And those are the key leaders within the group that know their facility, know their area. And this is where you would want the best makeup of all the workers there. So I'm just going to use an example of the nursing homes because that's what I know. So you would always want someone from nursing, like an LVN. You would always want someone from the kitchen staff, the custodial staff, and maintenance, right? Those generally would be a representation of everybody that's in that works in the nursing home, right? And so sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's just all CNAs, or sometimes it's all LVNs, or sometimes it's all custodial staff, which is fine. But you really want to make sure that you have a representational organization committee because, my needs or my desires are very different than what my nursing staff might need. You know what I mean? So in many ways, when I started, I was a janitor. And when we try to organize, like I couldn't speak for our nursing staff because I'm not a nurse. I was just a janitor. And I don't mean to say just a janitor, like that's not a super important job. I'm saying that because I was really young then, and I didn't have any idea about what is important for a nurse, So that's something that's where that committee could really help. Another thing is building support. Everyone has a friend and everyone needs to get there. It's kind of like the way unionization drives work is you start with one person, that person starts with two people, and then it goes exponentially. And that's how you start building your network. And this work, the groundwork is critical to a successful unionization campaign. Because when you go public, which is the next thing, that's when the boss is like, oh, whoa, what in the world? And then starts doing their campaign. That's where the pizza parties come in, the mandatory fun activities, the we're a family activities, the captive audience meetings, all these nonsense things that they do where they say that they're a family and that they love you and, don't get a union. They don't do anything for you, but yet they're scared to death of having one. And, there's a lot of these like logical fallacies that they try to push that don't make much sense. But that's where the building the support that you already have those kind of conversations. So folks already know what's going on. The next is card signing. So all of these things can be happening at the same time. So recognition and filing for an election. So recognition. So there are two ways that you can form a union. You can either have a recognition agreement with the employer where if the union has a majority of the workers, the employer will voluntarily recognize the unionization effort and will not interfere, and they'll just go with that. I have seen 2 of those in my life. And I think of those 2, one was like a nasty fight to the death, and they try to stop it at every turn, even though they were supposed to be neutral. And that was because that was in Kaiser, and Kaiser is like, I think it's like 83% or 85% unionized. So almost everybody that can have a union in Kaiser has a union in some way. And there are some unrepresented folks, but this group wanted to unionize, and they got unionized throughout the whole state of California, and Kaiser did everything in their power not to recognize it. So that's one thing. So you see a lot of these recognition agreements when the union's already pretty strong in that employer. And so it's just like, what's 10 more people or what's 100 more people when, 90% of your workforce is already unionized. So that kind of agreement. Another is the filing for the election. There are two types of bodies that deal with that. There's the NLRB, which is for the for the private sector. That's the National Labor Relations Board. They have districts all over the country. We are District 9, I think, for San Francisco. And then if you're in the public sector, you go through PERB, which is the Public Employees Relations Board. And basically that deals with public sector unionization or public sector unions and labor law in California. So that's how that would work. Boom, done. Labor board hearing. This is where the employer will say, oh, Mary Jo, no. Susie, no. Diego, no. Jackie, yes. Things like this. That's more for the attorney and for the union to kind of duke it out with them. The election campaign recognition campaign. So this is when your election campaign, that's when the bulk of the bad boss campaigns tend to work out, because they're trying to lower our voter turnout so they can win. So the way it works is, in order for management to win and for it to be no union, they only have to get equal amount of votes, so 50-50, or lose 49. So they have to win 51-49. And so for the union, we have to win 51 plus 50 plus 1, or blow them out of the water. But if there's a tie, it automatically goes to the employer, which is lame. And I think that's unfair, but it's part of the why doesn't everyone have a union piece that we were talking about earlier. Get out the vote, GOTV. This is where you go to your supporters. Your organizing committee will be essential in this to make sure that the folks that voted, that can vote, voted, the folks that need to vote, go vote, and everything like that. That's how that works. It's essentially just like an election for your congressman, your city council person, whatever the case may be. So this is where that works. And then after that, you win. Yay, congratulations. Your first contract campaign. So there's a lot of campaigns in this whole thing that's built into that. In the private sector, you have 1 year to kind of finish to get a camp. From the day that you win the election, you have 1 year to fill to get a contract before the employer can fight for a decertification to say that they're no longer representing the majority of workers. It's not a good place to be, and it tends to not happen as much because most of the time that's already taken care of. And so then you won your first contract. Congratulations, you got what you wanted from it. Awesome. The next huge thing is building power. It doesn't stop now that you have a contract, because your contract is not worth the paper it's printed on unless the members are engaged and know what's happening or what's in their contract. Because if you allow manager X to break the contract for you because it suits you, they can also break the contract against you because it suits them. So it's very clear that you want to be, on that and make sure that folks know. The fight, or the act of organizing never really stops. You just change what you're organizing about. And the fact that you have a contract is really where it's just labor peace, but there are other places that you can get you can organize for. You can also do safety issues, or there can be other things that you really need to work on that are not thought of in the contract, if that makes any sense. Excuse me. Okay, so another thing is, do not freak out. I know that was a lot of information that I gave you. Some might call it a fire hose of information. I wanted to just tell you everything because it's an organizer's tool called inoculation, which is really funny because of COVID, but it's funny to me, I guess. The fact of the matter is that I would be a bad rep / organizer if I didn't tell you all the things that could happen and all the work that is needed in order for you to get a union or forming a union. Again, if I didn't tell you this, you would have false expectations, and I just don't want to do that. And your organizer is going to be very good and to tell you that, because that's what they train us to do. They train us to do these inoculation conversations, to do, hey, this is what the boss can do, and we're going to do everything in our power to fight that. And this is what we can accomplish together, right? So, but I've distilled it in the next slide to what your steps would be. So, making contacts. So that would also just be contacting the local that you want to work with, talk to your workers, building your committee, building support, going public, and card signing. It's a lot better distilled list than that nonsense list that I just gave you, or that really long list. I don't mean nonsense, but it's good information. Mostly because I'm giving it to you. Let me make sure that this is so you guys can read it. I don't want to read it off. Okay, there you go. So I do want you guys to really understand that this is how this process works for you. Your rep or organizer is going to be with you 100% of the time. You should be calling them, you should be contacting them to just really get into this motion about it, because it's going to feel like it's never going to stop, but it does once you win. And that's what you want. That's the ultimate goal, is winning, and making sure that that euphoria of winning doesn't go away after that. And just to be clear, the steps don't have to be in order, and in many cases happen at the same time, but they're all necessary to have a good, successful union campaign. I've seen it happen with some of these things, and we've won, but it's not easy. It's in fact exponentially harder than when you have a fully committed organizing committee, when you have the mapping, when you have everything done. It's a lot easier, because then you can build your campaign around that. And so one of the things that a good rep is going to ask you, so say Tanya calls me and is like, hey, Diego, I want to organize my, I don't know, we'll just say nursing home again. My friend, my other friends, Floyd, Stephen, and Riley, we are all working different departments. Here is our list, right? So we already have that kind of, you can already have that kind of conversation. I was like, oh yeah, like Mary Sue, she's the boss's pet. Or, hey, we should really be careful about talking to Aaron, because, this is not, he gets a little skittish and might just go talk to the, or you can't talk to Bobby because Bobby is the boss's son. Things like this. You want to kind of be very clear about that. And again, no one's expected to know everything about everything at all times, because we wouldn't be human if we were. But it is good to kind of have an idea about all that stuff, so you're not kind of like flailing in the middle of it, trying to figure this out in real time, or worse, during the election. Because again, like we did with Care One, we had 70%, we had 70 or 75% on cards, which means 75% authorized the union to come in to file for the election. By the time we were done with the campaign, and by the time Care One did their whole nonsense, we were down to like 25%. And that was not even just including the firings or the sexual harassments or all the other nonsense that group did to bring those numbers down. Excuse me. So I do want to make sure that we're very clear about all that stuff. Okay, some final thoughts. So, like I said before, forming a union is one of the greatest things that you can do in your workplace. If not, it's the best way for you to be on equal ground with your employer. And I have seen people change their lives because of a union that a union was formed in their workplace. And I mean, sometimes it's not overnight. Sometimes they have to fight a little bit more because their employer is just that awful. But when it's done, the goals and everything are there. And, in my own family, my brother went from making $10 an hour as a truck driver to making 25 because he now is in a union, he's in a union shop, and he is doing really well for himself. I mean, that is night and day. It's almost that's a lot of money. That's, more than 100%, right? And so I want to just make sure that if you forget everything that I've told you, remember this. It's never going to be easy, but nothing that's worth doing is ever easy. And it's so good. And the days that you win those elections and the days that you win those campaigns are like some of the happiest moments of my life, is being able to say that we won a campaign. Or and as a rep now, because I'm no longer considered or I'm always an organizer, I don't care what anybody says, but as a rep, those are the days that get me going through it, because there's a lot of times where it's really hard going through what we're going through because of COVID, because of Zoom fatigue, because of all this other stuff. But man, is it so worth it to do it. And I highly suggest that if you're interested in doing that and you need contacts, let me know, because I would love I would love for this to be, hey, Diego, we're forming a union in my workplace because of this. And if that happens, that would be great. And my goal is to get more young people or young adults like yourself interested in the labor movement to work, because we need young blood into this to invigorate and to change the outlook. Because the way I say ours because I'm only a few, I like to say only a few years older than you, but it's a little bit closer to 10 and slowly creeping up. That our work experiences are very different than our parents' work experience, for better or worse, right? I think, as the son of an immigrant, it's very different than how someone who are not first generation workers. So I do want you to do that. And if you want more information that I could give you in this hour-long presentation, please feel free to contact me. My contact information is here. And yes, I'm a huge Baratheon fan because I'm a huge Game of Thrones nerd. I don't care. It's actually one of my call signs on my email. So if you make it as an adult, you can put passive aggressive like signatures, where you could put like Hours as a Fury as your signature page, which I feel like that's where I knew I made it as an adult, where I could do things like that. So with that, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Sonoma State, for allowing me the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And I'm so thankful. I really am. So thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And if there's questions, please, I'm here until 5.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either type in chat or just to unmute yourself and ask. I know that Caitlin had put in an evaluation form into the chat. If you guys could fill that out, that would be really helpful so we can keep this event going in the future. Anyone have any questions?
I just want to say, Diego, thank you so much. That was such an amazing presentation. I feel like I learned so much more about unions and the amount of work that people go through to actually organize a union. So I really appreciate everything that you had to share with us. And I guess my question would be, other than just like forming unions and like getting into like stronger unionizing efforts, like what are other ways that we can support the labor movement?
Well, when there are strike actions, we always look forward to public support. So when there are strike actions, you can come to those picket lines. We're never going to say no to someone who wants to come in. Also, when there are things like that affect the community, that also affect like disproportionately my members, because we're public sector workers, to go speak on our behalf as a member of the voting public also helps a lot. um, they always know what our position is. My position is that I feel like all my members are super awesome, and anything to the contrary that is bad, right? So, but it also means a lot more when it comes from the public. And so if you've had an experience where it was positive and you want to support, like say, because they were trying to get rid of a program that disproportionately helped women of color, that were how should I put this, that were abused, like I don't want to say they were abused, like domestic violence situations like this. And this program was actually a program to help them get job training skills for them to be able to go into the workforce and to be their own person after being in these not great situations. And the board of supervisors wanted to cut this program. It was not what our members said, but it was what the members of the public that got them to think, oh, wow, this is not just dollars and signs on a spreadsheet. This is actually real deal things that actually can affect the lives of people in our community. And those are some of the things that you can do to help the labor movement. Go to actions, go to the schools. The North Bay Labor Council has organizing workshops, sort of like a better or a longer version of this presentation, where they give you the tools that you need to organize your workshop. And if you need that information, please let me know. I will gladly give you that. I know I sent it to Tanya a couple times. So, if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know. And I will start asking if folks want to. I do these trainings for my job with my members, and I would have no problem if you ever are interested in going to just come to the class, and we can go from there. I think Jane, you were trying to say something.
Well, thank you, and
Sorry.
I appreciate the strength of your commitment. Firstly, I happen to be born in Wisconsin, so I had an identity with what you were describing as what makes good.
Yeah.
As a location for hope and care for people.
Yep.
But I think I'm generalizing in my question, saying, when the need is so great and the potential is so kind of at the edge of being transformed into something new, and the necessity to meet people, not only where they are, but to elicit conversation and dialogue and but then the fullness of the emotional zest in wanting to participate in in making for well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you said it at the beginning, that respect is central, but I wonder how you maybe each of us in moments of wanting to make change, or to show up that we have something deeply unmet and that other person has the capacity to make a difference. How do you hold in the balance the emotions and the reason?
So I'm very flawed sometimes. Sometimes I can't do that. And so sometimes I do get into this space where it's like, what are you doing? Why are we fighting about something that seems so obvious to me, right? And a lot of times I have to just take a step back and do something called like check the facts and just really see where some people are coming from. And sometimes, even though they're coming from a situation that I don't necessarily agree that that's where they landed, it makes sense to at least have that conversation so you can acknowledge that. And I think also acknowledging the differences is also a very powerful act in trying to get people to work together. I used to be in the military, and it's a very different way of getting people to do things because I was a sergeant, and you do what I say because I'm a sergeant. But even with that, there were times where people just said no. And so you have to be able to work on that without being, a bulldozer. But sometimes you also need to recognize that no matter how good you are in acknowledging and understanding, you're never going to it's never going to work out. And so you also need to know when to cut the cord, as I like to say, right? You need to be able to recognize, like, you know what, this person is not ready for this conversation, or this person is not ready to be a part of this.
Right.
We're just going to disengage. And maybe they're going to come around, and then we will have open arms for them, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to engage with them forever. And because emotional labor is still labor, right? Like, having a really harsh conversation with somebody constantly is super draining. And for your own emotional well-being, if you're not well for yourself, you can't help other people. So that's one of those times where you just have to set the boundary and say, you know what, we're not going to agree, and that's okay for now. We will not engage right now in that, unless they're saying something terrible, like if they're like out and out racist or something to this effect. Like, there's never going to be a moment where you're going to be like, oh yeah, like, I can agree to disagree that you think that the Armenian genocide never happened. Like, no, that's insanity. You can't be okay with that. But if it's not something like that, and very rarely is it something like that, you can come to the agreement that maybe you're not ready to talk to them, or they're not ready to engage with you, and you move on to someone who does. And that's how I dealt with certain things.
Right. And if I don't want to take up too much time, but it ties in sort of with something else you said that's related to this, but the other side of it, which is, I think somewhere I heard that whoever is ready to participate with creating the momentum to be successful with creating the union, that on the emotional scale, on the uncertainty scale of whether it's their thinking, their emotion, the practicality, the impracticality, that you're going to be there to hold their question. Like, I don't know if it would be you, because how much do you have to give when you're working with so many?
Oh, so how do
you develop that solidarity?
So it's very much a work in progress. Absolutely. Okay. And a lot of times people are understanding. They're a lot more understanding than might expect. And so sometimes you have to tell them, hey, I really can't work on this right now. Let me get back to you. And people will be okay with that, as long as you acknowledge it and follow up, obviously. But that's how I've learned to do it, is that I've never gotten in trouble for telling people I can't handle their question at the moment. I've gotten in trouble for not responding at all because I couldn't do it.
Right.
And so and also, like I said before, your emotion is what, I didn't say this, but I wanted to say this, but emotions is what actually carries elections. It's not facts. And I wish that was the case, that facts don't care about feelings, because if that was the case, everyone would be unionized. Just because the facts are unionization means more money, and unionization does this, this, and that. But that's not the case. People make emotional decisions about things that have actual effects in their lives. And it doesn't make it any less valid. It's just the reality of the situation.
Right. Well,
so that's how I do it.
Got it. Thank you so much.
So I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Bye, all.
Bye. Thank you, Tanya, for having us. Bye.
Of course, thank you for being here. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.